next up, we have Deloitte. Is Eleonora Maria Belenghi, Consultant for Climate and Sustainability on their team there, and Roxana Moise, Director for Human Capital Advisory Services. And they are going to talk about a just and fair transition, decoding what it entails and how it is fostered by EU ESG regulation. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here with you for the last session of today. I know we've had a really long day, so a bit lower. Thank you. Thanks for the tip. I hope it's okay. And afterwards, I'll move over there, and I have a mic that moves, and I'm terrible at that, so I'll be appreciating tips in case the sound is not okay. But I know you've had a long day, and before we move on to an actual nice menu, let's see what is the menu for today's last session together. We would like, as we've heard, to talk about just and fair transition. It's a topic that has been around for a while, and it's gaining momentum in the last few years. So we'll start with defining what we mean by this and putting a pin so that we're all on the same page. Then we will also see where the market stands, what the guidance is to pursue a just and fair transition. And also we will see with Roxana what to do and how to actually take on a just and fair transition for the workforce. And finally, we will touch upon the last big actor that is touched by the just and fair transition, which is the state. So to get started, let's recap, as we were saying, so that we're all on the same page. What do we mean with just and fair transition? And for this, I would like to borrow the definition that the ILO takes, because before the EU started to also deal with this topic, the ILO, as you know, the International Labour Organization, has really been the point of reference for this topic. So the ILO defines the just and fair transition as greening the economy in a way that is as inclusive as possible to everyone concerned, creating decent work opportunity and leaving no one behind. And this last bit, leaving no one behind, has also been integrated and borrowed, if we can say it this way, by the EU Green Deal in 2019. So this is the main topic of today's conversation and presentation, but who does the just and fair transition concern? In one word, everybody. More into detail, we can identify three main categories of actors. So we have the government, as we will see in the last bit of today's presentation, employers, as we will see with Roxana, and as individual workers. Within the second category, who are the most impacted entities? The ones that are belonging to industry that are the most polluting, hence the hardest to abate. Let's have a recap, because it's going to be useful later on for the conversation. According to the IPCC, I'm sure there's no surprise for you here. It's the usual suspects, but the companies that are going to have a harder time transitioning, which doesn't mean that they're bad industries, it's just industry that will need to work more to achieve a just and fair transition, are the one related to energy production, transportation, industry, as in manufacturing, agriculture, residential workers, real estate, and waste management. So under the category of employers, these are the ones that will have to work the hardest to achieve a just and fair transition. But let's see what are the challenges for the other entities with Roxana.
Thank you. Okay, I hope it works. So first of all, as you see, we change a little bit the register of the conversation. And I would like to approach it not from a compliance perspective and risk perspective, which is the typical way that we go into the sustainability topic, but rather from a people topic. So if we look from this perspective, as my colleague mentioned, we are looking at different dimensions. So we look at the government, employers, and workers. We're talking about impacts that they have, rippling effects on all these dimensions, and obviously on a society as a whole. And I will not go through all the elements, but I will take one. And I will start with the people, with the workers, so the employees. Let's talk about green skills. I'm sure everybody heard the topic. It's a hot topic. when it comes from the people perspective of working in organizations, what is expected is that sustainability is going to challenge the type of skills that the organizations have today versus what will be required tomorrow. And there are different shifts that we can expect from the people perspective. It can be cases where you have sustainability specialist roles that will be required to upskill, enhance certain skills like data analytics or, let's say, communication skills and so on. You can have afterwards your typical roles in the organization that they will require to be upskilled on sustainability topics. And I think the top functions, let's put it this way, that they are expected to be impacted. Obviously, they are operations, finance, HR, procurement, and so on. And I will stop here to make the point that sustainability is not a department. So we want to say that sustainability is basically a new way of working that is going to affect and impact across the organization. And I think this is a change in paradigm, because what the idea would be afterwards is how the organization, the government, and people themselves, they are expected to behave and change the way of working to make sure that they enable this just and fair transition. It can be cases, and I'm sure they are also well known, of the industries that are the most polluting that my colleague Eleonora was mentioning. In those specific cases, you have roles that are impacting, new roles that are coming up, and obviously people that will be significantly impacted, especially, let's say, the low-skill type of roles in the organization. And we can talk about oil and gas, we can talk about, let's say, the rig workers and so on. So what happens in those cases? And based on our analysis and research at Deloitte, obviously there is a point of reskilling, so understanding which are the most impacted roles in these specific cases and how they can be addressed. What are the type of upskilling that can be done? Maybe a person that works on the, let's say, a specialist on electricity and an engineer on electricity could shift to wind turbines. So just to make a point, obviously it's beyond the organization itself, but the organization has a specific role. And as you see me already, it's fluently going towards how the organization handles it. And obviously, sometimes the organizations, they are in a bit of an inertia, if I may call it this way. They need to be prompted to react. So I think this is the role of the government by its solutions and by its initiatives to make sure that they trigger certain behaviors from the business side as well, and as well as support it. Just in the interest of time, because otherwise, two numbers, there are plenty, but the point is to say here that nevertheless, we expect to have a significant challenge from the people perspective when it comes to just and fair transition. Actually, the level of maturity of, let's say, the ecosystem to deal with it, it's pretty, let's say, at the level of being improved. There is a lot of improvement there to be done. So you see that less than 1% of some of the major companies are planning this in an effective manner. And the second number that we have there has to say that, again, the way it is approached, and you'll see later on in the presentation, is typically a bit more short-term, reactive-like, not necessarily in a strategic way. And by that, we mean, again, not necessarily just via the compliance and the risk angle, but top-down from a company strategy perspective, which means that everyone in the organization plays a role. So it's a rippling effect. Yeah. I will let you pass to the regulation side.
Okay, perfect. Let's see if I can maintain a regular distance and also borrow this. Thank you. So we have seen what we define as a just and fair transition. We have seen the three main categories of actors that are in scope, as we've just said, the workers, the employers, and the government. We have also just seen that they're not doing also well in their transition path. So let's see what is the guidance available. We have guidance available from an international point of view because, as we said before, before the EU also took on initiatives in this field, the ILO and other international organizations were already active in the field. So we see here a plethora of initiatives that are either aiming at giving direct guidance or providing a framework or even funding for one of the three categories of actors that we mentioned. But as it's often the case when guidance and even funding is available but without an obligation, not a lot gets done. That is also why we come down to what the EU does. And on this field, as on many others, and I'm sure that for those of you that work in sustainable finance, this is not going to be a surprise, the approach that has been taken is the one of disclosure requirements. Why is that? It's because the EU, as you know, wants to create a framework for transparency. With this fostering of transparency, it will also foster, hopefully, according to the EU point of view, taking on of initiatives to tackle the question of the regulation, in this case, just and fair transition. So we can regroup the majority of the disclosure requirements concerning just and fair transition into the 3 boxes that you can see here. So let's see them together. We have anticipate, assess, and minimize social risks of the transition on the one hand. We have identify, enable, maximize opportunities and benefits of the transition, and finally, ensure meaningful participation and dialogue in planning and execution. What does it all mean? It means that the disclosure requirements of the EU can be split, as we said, into 3 parts: risk, benefits, and ensurement that there is dialogue, because we're talking about something linked to the S pillar, so dialogue is crucial. And the last part of the slide, it's a bit dense in text, but what's the main objective of information here? It's the idea of seeing what's already present in all of the disclosure requirements that we have in the EU. They are supposed to be targeting these other activities that we see on the right side of the slide. So we see that there are indicators already in SFDR, but also in CSRD and CSDDD. Now, you know it better than I do. For this last 2 regulation, we don't have that many reports on the market yet. So maybe we can meet again in a year to see how the transition has been going so far with these topics. But it's interesting to see that there is still a push from the regulator to consider these topics. But taking on, as Roxana was saying earlier, a bit of a different approach that goes beyond compliance, let's see together what are the actual initiatives that could be put into place.
Thank you very much. Okay, so on the top part, or the starting point of this, I think it's an awareness that when we talk about impacts and skills, we're not thinking just about sustainability specialist type of skills. Again, we're not talking just about the department, we're not talking about just compliance. We're talking about all the skills and behaviors and knowledge that is needed from an organizational perspective, and this is our perspective today, in such a way that we adapt efficiently the processes, the services, the products that that entity delivers to the sustainability objectives and targets. So it is very important that we are all aligned on this starting point, because from this perspective, the type of initiatives that we can take and we should take, and the approach we should take, is not just let's say, knowledge transfer, is not just a training in itself. And actually, that has proved not to be extremely efficient, or let's put it this way, efficient up to a certain level. What we have found at Deloitte in our research is that obviously organizations, they have different maturity levels. And what you see there in terms of understanding, developing, performing, and afterwards leading, they are, let's say, maturity levels at the same time as potential phases and steps that the organization can take and the people can take and trigger in order to evolve and grow in the sustainability area. So we start with the understanding. What does it mean? Obviously, it talks about awareness. When you talk about awareness is, again, from the organizational perspective, is the benefits that the sustainability and upskilling and reskilling the people and taking some strategic actions would have on the organization. Again, sustainability as a business topic, as a strategic topic that should start top down, which is not, again, just via, okay, we should do that because there are also certain risks and compliance issues that we need to be aware of. But how we can grow our business from top to bottom, what is our vision from top to bottom, to make sure that we really infuse all our organization with the sustainability ways of doing. And you will see that you go up to the other side of the spectrum when you go into a leading mode or a leading phase, where you don't look at just yourself, but you look wider at your ecosystem of partners, at your value chain, to make sure that the best practices or the lessons learned that you have developed in this area, you can also promote it outside, and you can benefit the, let's say, the outside as well type of world. So starting with the understanding, this is the first part. Then you go into a developing, and this is, again, very important to say that we talk about a strategic approach in terms of how we can align, let's say, the workforce of the organization, and what is the plan that we have for our people to make sure that they will be at the level and able to deliver according to the targets that have been set at the organizational level in terms of sustainability. Then we go into a performing, so it's the part of the implementing, how we implement that, how we are doing in a consistent manner. Do we have the right processes to do so? Do we have the right metrics to do so in terms of maturity? And afterwards, leading approach. Typically, there is this is based on a blueprint, on a more blueprint for an organizational model. And this is also to respond to the fact that when it comes to how do we tackle from a people perspective the side of the sustainability, organization, we found out that they miss models, they miss standards, they miss competencies. So this is built into that direction to provide that framework. So today I'm going to go tip of the iceberg on some of the elements, and I will give you some few examples that we found from the market. So the first part, how we build it from the challenges perspective. So when what we found in the conversation with our partners and clients is that typically there are two elements here or two challenges that they face. One is that the leadership themselves, sometimes they are not really clear on what is the value for the green skills to be developed in the organization itself. And this is a need of really this is what I meant when I said that it should be a business perspective to it. What is the business case of that? How we can show the quick wins and how we can actually provide that type of information to support the leadership to take the decisions that are required. And the other part is more, let's say, bottom-up, and in the sense of making sure that there is an understanding and a knowledge of what sustainability means and what sustainability means for the organization. And that's the last part of mapping the sustainability impacts. What I was saying before, I think one of the starting points is for all the organization and people to understand what is their place in the future. So what are the things that they need to be adjusted in terms of skills, ways of working, and so on and so forth, to make sure the organization itself and the people are able to get there. A very simple and quick example, what you see there, that case is basically from food industry. What they did, building on the environmental management system, is they created a knowledge hub. So essentially, they had different plants and different sites. So on top of the processes and procedures that come along that system, they basically created a platform that connected in real time all the plants, and they were able to, first of all, it was a knowledge sharing type of environment. They were sharing best practices, and they were also being able to follow up in real time how they measure against the targets that they have. It's a very simple, let's say, example, but it takes commitment. So I think it's an example to say, first of all, it was a leadership commitment to invest in that. And secondly, it was to be aware, it was the level of awareness in terms of people organization to, okay, this is something we need to build as knowledge for all of us. The second part, which is the developing. What we were mentioning before is that there is not always the right knowledge in terms of how we should start. And again, the way people start, they start more mostly on things that, okay, we must do that because there is a risk of compliance and so on. I think the point would be to see how we can start from a top-down and from a strategic perspective, And this is where also the HR plays a significant role, not only, but just because they are the, let's say, focused a lot on the people side of the organization, but to see and come forward with strategic approaches of how the workforce planning should be done in the organization to respond to the impacts that sustainability has on those roles. So these are elements which are very important and should complement any type of business decision. The other part is related to, let's say, people are used to, and this goes into a behavioral change a little bit, of cultural change. People are used to work in a certain way, and it's very difficult to shift. We're talking about processes and ways of doing things that people are very much, let's say, prisoners of. And even though we want to change, it's not always obvious. We typically do it because we have to. We typically do it for maybe a short period of time. But significant change, it requires a lot of effort, actually, and a lot of time from our experience. The example there, and it's linked also to TT Electronics, it's again very simple. And again, it requires investment and awareness and leadership drive. It has to do with green networks. What did they do? They basically had a sustainability council that was overseeing all the, let's say, all the sustainability topics in the organization. And they also built what we called a championship program. So they created this network of green champions in the organization that were people, again, looking to build the business case, looking to share best practices, and at the same time making sure that there is the right level of incentive for the people in the organization to move to that direction. So making sure that sustainability is in the minds and in the stories of everyone in the organization is a constant reminder that this is a direction we should take. The last but not least, I think it builds into the direction of the learning. Nobody has time for trainings, let's be honest. Or you have your mandatory trainings that you go to. I think we're always overloaded with the amount of information that you need to absorb every day. And not everyone is happy to go in a training mode, in an instructor-led training course, or on an e-learning and get stuck to the computer 1 more hour and so on. So the question is, considering the time that we have and considering the, let's say, focus on other priorities that we have, how we can learn things in a different way, in a more sustainable way from that perspective. We learn every day. So again, in terms of learning strategy, another key partner in the conversation would be the learning team in the organization that would be able to have, let's say, quick ways for people to learn, let's say, bite-sized type of learnings, or to make sure there is a mentorship or a coaching in place. In any case, to embed learning in the daily organization life. And I think this builds in 2 ways, because then basically people will exercise the new ways of working and the, let's say, the more sustainable, focused ways of working by the way they deliver their tasks. In the interest of time, so I will not stress not too much, I will go a bit forward. Performing, I think here a few things from perspective of the leadership. There is sometimes, let's say, considering the changes that are quite frequent in this area, sometimes from our conversation with the leadership team, they feel a bit pressed. They are a bit, let's say, wary of the fact that if they take certain decisions, then things may shift. So there are new things coming up. How can we trigger the right approach? And this is where also, not just now, but in addition, the government side plays a significant role to make sure that there is a visible partnership from the governance side that ensures the fact that we are talking about long-term plans and encourages the leadership team in the organization to do those investments, because they are investments that eventually need to be done. And last but not least is to talk about the fact that sometimes this type of initiatives that are taken in the organizations, they are not always long-term. Yeah? So from this perspective, to reinforce the fact that this is a topic that needs to come in the organization life and stay there, One way of doing it, and that's another example, and I'm sure you are aware, they are the sustainability metrics and the incentives that come out of it. And I'm sure we all know that sometimes there is a, let's say, link between the performance, the yearly performance bonuses and so on, linked to how the company achieves certain sustainability metrics. And that's one of the, for example, the examples the British Telecom did. And you have another example there, which is Speedy Services. They are in the business of renting equipment and tools, for example, for plants. What they did, they got to the level of the job of the people, and they basically updated and reflected in the expectations from each of the jobs, sustainability elements, depending on the impacts that are expected. So you see, from understanding what are the impacts, making sure that we have the right level of commitment from the leadership, and afterwards really embedding it in the fabric of the organization by the right updates on the roles. Last but not least, is the fact that once you get to a certain level, I think there is a responsibility for all of us that are working in the business and we're passionate about it, to make sure that we spread the word, and not only, but also the requirements. So this is the part where we share with our partners in the network and our supply chain the requirements that are linked to sustainability. So in a way, we work together, we work in the same way. And at the same time, you can have certain certifications or supplier forums. So there are things that organizations can do that go beyond the boundaries of their type of their entity. One example, NHS, so it's the healthcare from UK. They basically set certain requirements when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to plastics use and so on, for the suppliers in their chain, to make sure that they themselves can reach their targets when it comes to decarbonization on their side. I will stop here. It was really the tip of the iceberg. I hope it was a little bit teasing and a little bit different than what you guys experienced. It was a pleasure. I'm going to give back all the devices to Eleonora.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you also for all of these examples. We only have 3 minutes left, so let's recap quickly what we've seen so far. We have defined what a just and fair transition is. We have seen how the market is doing so far on the topic, not so well, but we also have seen there is a lot of guidance available and also a lot of examples and already positive forerunners on these topics. Now, how to go forward? We have seen a few examples, but also we wanted to quickly touch upon the last big actor that we haven't yet mentioned, because we have mentioned organizations with all of the examples seen with Roxana. There is a plethora already of guidance and initiatives for individuals as workers, so we won't touch upon those. And we want to see quickly what is the role of the state in all of this. Some countries are considering creating a just transition ministry to give indeed guidance and structure a bit everything that we said and seen so far to make it mandatory. For instance, is the case, it's not working anymore. It is again, it's the case of Canada, or is it? It's not. But in Canada, there is quite a lot of pressure on this transition. And it could be an initiative to be considered also in Luxembourg. But what's going on in Luxembourg so far, we're not doing all that bad either, because as we can see from an EIB survey, there is an interest from our point of view, so from the point of view of workers, to take on a journey on just and fair transition. For instance, most people believe that it's important also to consider this more social part to be able to achieve the objectives of the Green Deal, so of a greener economy. And what is the Luxembourg government doing on all of this? Quite a lot, actually, because in the latest and most updated version of the climate plan for this decade, there are more than 190 measures that have been either drafted or redrafted with the intention of better covering this more social and fair part of the just and fair transition. I will leave you to the link to analyze in further detail, and we would just like to leave you with one quote that we really like, because we've really quickly touched upon so many different things, so many different initiatives from the different actors that are touched and impacted by the just and fair transition. So we would like to close with this quote from Sir David Attenborough. If working apart, we're a force powerful enough to destabilize our planet, sure, working together, so workers, employers, and government, we're powerful enough to save it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very dynamic Deloitte duo there. I really, really enjoyed that presentation. Thank you very much.